I'm Savannah, 48 female. I live in a quiet, tree-lined suburb that feels a world away from the bustling city where I work. My life, until recently, was a carefully curated balance of professional success and personal contentment, shared with my husband, David. I'm a financial analyst, a job that requires logic, foresight, and an intimate understanding of value, qualities I thought I had applied to my personal life as well. But I was wrong. I was about to learn that the most painful debts have nothing to do with money, and that the highest price you can pay is for a love that was never real. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The news of Brooke's engagement came on a crisp autumn Sunday. The air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves, a smell I'd always associated with cozy, happy endings. David and I were in the garden, pruning the last of the roses, when his phone buzzed with a call from his daughter. He answered with that special tone he reserved only for her, a blend of pride and paternal softness. I watched his face light up, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I didn't need to hear her words to know the news was monumental. "She said yes," David announced, pulling me into a hug, his voice thick with emotion. "My little girl is getting married." Later that evening, Brooke and her new fiancé, Leo, came over for a celebratory dinner. Leo was a sweet, slightly shy graphic designer with kind eyes and a talent that was obvious in the beautiful, custom-designed announcement card he'd made. He seemed to adore Brooke, looking at her as if she'd personally hung the moon in the sky. Brooke, on the other hand, was incandescent. She radiated a joy so potent it was almost blinding, showing off a delicate diamond ring that sparkled under our dining room lights. At 24, she was a whirlwind of energy and ambition, working as an assistant for an event planner while dreaming of one day running her own high-end coordination business. I'd always had a complicated relationship with Brooke. I met David when she was already in college, a young woman of 19 who saw me not as a person, but as a replacement for the mother she'd lost to illness a decade prior. No matter how gently I trod, how much space I gave her, I was an intruder in her sacred family unit. David, a tenured history professor at the local university, was a good man with a significant blind spot: his daughter. In his eyes, Brooke could do no wrong. Any friction between us was, in his gentle framing, a simple misunderstanding or a result of my not yet fully grasping their unique bond. For the sake of my love for him, I tried. I smiled through the backhanded compliments, ignored the subtle digs, and endured the family holidays where I felt more like a guest than a member. As we sat around the table, sipping champagne, the conversation inevitably turned to the wedding itself. Brooke had a vision, one she'd been crafting since childhood. It was a grand affair, a historic manor for the venue, a couture gown, a 7-course meal, and a guest list that seemed to stretch into the hundreds. Her eyes shone as she described it, painting a picture of unparalleled elegance. Leo listened, smiling, but I saw the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. He was a good man, but a high school teacher's salary doesn't typically stretch to accommodate fairy tale weddings. David, bless his heart, was caught up in the fantasy. "Whatever you want, sweetheart," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "We'll make it happen." The silence that followed was brief but heavy. I knew David's finances intimately. He was comfortable, but his professor's salary was modest. He had his pension and the house, which we shared, but his savings had been depleted years ago after a bad investment he'd made before we met. He certainly didn't have the liquid assets for the 6-figure wedding Brooke was describing. Later that week, the reality of the situation crashed down. David called me into his study, his face etched with worry. He had a spreadsheet open on his laptop, filled with preliminary costs Brooke had sent him. The numbers were staggering. I don't know what to do, Savannah," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "I told her we'd make it happen. I can't bear to tell her I can't afford it. It would break her heart." This was my moment, my chance to bridge the chasm between Brooke and me. My career had been far more lucrative than David's. Through years of diligent work and savvy investing, I had built a substantial portfolio. I was financially secure, independent, and more than capable of funding this dream wedding. I saw it as an investment, not in a party, but in my family. It was a way to finally, unequivocally, show both David and Brooke that I was committed to their Pinus, that I wasn't just a visitor in their lives. "David," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "don't worry, I'll take care of it." He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound relief. "Savannah, no, I couldn't ask you to do that. This is my responsibility." "We're a family," I insisted gently. "Your daughter is my stepdaughter. Let me do this. Please. It would mean the world to me to be able to give her the wedding she's always dreamed of." The gratitude that washed over his face was overwhelming. That night, we called Brooke and Leo and put them on speakerphone. "Brooke, honey," David began, his voice thick with emotion. "Savannah and I have been talking. She wants to make sure you have the perfect day. She's offered to cover the wedding costs." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by a choked sob from Brooke. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Savannah, are you serious? I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll let me," I replied, my own voice tight with emotion. My heart swelled. This was it. This was the breakthrough I had been waiting for. "Thank you," she cried, her voice filled with what I mistook for genuine, heartfelt gratitude. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. You have no idea what this means to me, to us." That night, as I lay in bed next to a deeply relieved and loving David, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I was finally building a real family. I was paying for a wedding, yes, but I truly believed I was buying happiness. It was a promise of a perfect day, and I was the one who was going to deliver it. I had no idea that I was not just funding a celebration, but also financing my own heartbreak. The initial weeks of wedding planning were a flurry of cheerful activity. I transferred a significant sum, a budget we'd all agreed upon, into a new joint account that I managed, but which Brooke could access for deposits and payments. The amount was generous, enough to cover her dream venue, a magnificent 19th century estate with sprawling gardens and all the trimmings she desired. I made it clear that this was her day, and my role was simply to facilitate her vision. Brooke seemed transformed. She called me regularly, bubbling with excitement over floral arrangements and cake tastings. She asked for my opinion on color palettes and bridesmaid dresses. For the first time, I felt like we were connecting, building the foundation of a real relationship. David was overjoyed, constantly telling me how much my gesture meant to him and how he could see a beautiful friendship blossoming between his wife and his daughter. I was starting to believe it myself. The first dissonant note was struck during the search for the wedding gown. We had an appointment at a high-end bridal boutique in the city. I'd taken the day off work to be there, excited to share in this iconic mother-daughter moment, even as a stepmother. Brooke had invited her maid of honor and another bridesmaid. As Brooke tried on a breathtaking lace gown, she twirled in front of the mirror, a vision of bridal perfection. "It's perfect," she breathed. "But look at this price tag. It's astronomical." Her maid of honor, a woman named Chloe whom I'd always found a bit sharp-edged, laughed lightly. "Who cares? It's not like you're the one paying for it." Brooke shot her a quick, almost imperceptible glance in the mirror, a silent warning that I wasn't meant to catch. She then turned to me, her face arranged in a mask of sweet appreciation. "Don't be silly, Chloe. I'm so grateful for everything Savannah is doing." The comment felt like a small, cold pebble dropped into a warm pond. I tried to dismiss it as a thoughtless remark from a friend, but it lingered. Was that how they talked about it when I wasn't around? That the money was just an endless, impersonal resource to be spent without a second thought. The whispers grew more frequent, though always just out of direct earshot. A few weeks later, I was handling the contract for the caterer. There was an issue with the deposit, so I called Brooke to clarify a detail. She answered, but her voice was muffled, and I could hear other people in the background. It was clear she hadn't realized who was calling before she picked up. "Just has to sign it," I heard her say, her voice dripping with an unfamiliar impatience. "Honestly, she has all the money in the world. You'd think she could just get it done without asking me a million questions. There was a brief pause, and then I heard her say, "Oh, hang on." The background noise quieted, and her voice shifted, becoming the sweet, cheerful tone I was used to. "Hi, Savannah. Sorry about that, I was just in a noisy cafe. What's up?" I asked my question about the contract, my voice sounding strained and distant even to my own ears. My heart was pounding. She has all the money in the world. It wasn't gratitude, it was entitlement. The generosity I had offered was bae. NG reframed as an obligation. I was no longer the kind stepmother making her dream come true. I was a walking, talking bank account. I brought my concerns to David, choosing my words carefully. "Honey, I'm a little worried about Brooke's attitude towards the wedding finances," I started one evening. "I overheard a couple of things that sounded, well, a little ungrateful." David's reaction was immediate and defensive, just as I had feared. He put down his book and sighed, a look of weary patience on his face. "Savannah, she's a young bride under a lot of stress. She's probably just venting to her friends. You know how girls can be. She's told me a dozen times how incredibly thankful she is for you. Don't read too much into it." "It's not just that, David," I pressed gently. "It's the way she talks about the money. It's as if it's just there, as if it doesn't represent years of my hard work." "She's young," he repeated, his voice taking on a patronizing edge. "She doesn't understand the world of finance the way you do. To her, it's just an abstract number. Her heart is in the right place. Please, don't let a few clumsy words spoil this. We were doing so well." His dismissal hurt more than Brooke's comments. He wasn't hearing me, he was managing me. He was smoothing things over to avoid conflict, to protect the fragile peace I was paying so dearly to maintain. I felt foolish and overly sensitive. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was expecting too much. So I pushed my doubts down, burying them under a fresh layer of forced optimism. But the incidents kept accumulating, like a series of small cuts that alone were manageable, but together began to bleed me dry of my goodwill. There was the time she upgraded the floral package to include imported orchids without consulting me, an addition that cost several $1,000s. When I gently questioned it, her response was breezy. "Oh, the florist said it would make a world of difference, and I knew you'd want it to be perfect. I just put it on the account." Then came the guest list. It had ballooned from 200 to nearly 300 people. Many of the new additions were Brooke's friends, distant relatives, and even her mother's old colleagues, people I had never met. Each additional head meant more cost for catering, seating, and favors. When I sat down with David and Brooke to discuss the expanding budget, Brooke's eyes filled with tears. "These people are important to me," she said, her voice trembling. "My mom would have wanted them there. I thought the budget was just a guideline. I didn't realize you were going to be so strict about it." The implication was clear. I was being stingy. I, who had gifted her a small fortune, was being painted as a miser for trying to maintain some semblance of fiscal responsibility. David immediately rushed to her side, comforting her. He looked at me with pleading eyes, a silent request to just give in, to keep the peace. I felt a cold knot of dread forming in my stomach. This wasn't about stress or youthful ignorance anymore. This was a pattern of behavior. The whispers of ingratitude had grown into a clear, articulate voice of entitlement. My gift was no longer seen as a gift, but as a debt she was owed. I was paying for every centerpiece, every appetizer, every chair. And in return, I was receiving a constant barrage of subtle disrespect, a slow and steady erosion of my worth in the family I was so desperately trying to build. I was no longer an investor in their happiness. I was simply its primary commodity. The breaking point didn't arrive with a bang, but with the quiet chime of an incoming email. I was at my desk, working late to finalize a quarterly report. The office was silent, the city lights twinkling outside my window. It was a moment of peace in an increasingly turbulent emotional landscape. My phone lit up with a notification. It was an email from the wedding venue coordinator, a woman named Patricia with whom I'd been liaising. The subject line was innocuous: "Ari, final walkthrough schedule. I opened it, expecting a simple confirmation of dates. Instead, my eyes fell upon the email chain below her message. She had, by mistake, forwarded the entire conversation she'd been having with Brooke earlier that day. My blood ran cold as I started to read. Brooke's emails were a stark contrast to the bubbly, grateful persona she presented to me. Her tone was demanding, arrogant, and dismissive. She referred to the carefully planned budget as a suggestion and had been trying to authorize yet another upgrade, a custom-built ice luge for the cocktail hour, without my knowledge. Patricia, the coordinator, had been gently pushing back, stating that any changes over a certain amount required my direct signature, as I was the sole signatory on the contract. Brooke's reply is what stopped my heart. "Look, Patricia," she had written, the words sharp and cruel on the screen. "Just get it done. Her name is on the contract, but it's my wedding. My dad married a lonely workaholic with a massive bank account for a reason. She's not just a stepmom, she's an investor. Consider this me cashing in a dividend. She won't even notice. Just add it to the tab. She's a gold digger in reverse." I read the words again and again. Each syllable was a physical blow. Lonely workaholic. Gold digger in reverse. The phrase echoed in the silent office, a venomous indictment of everything I had tried to be. It wasn't just ingratitude. It was a complete, contemptuous fabrication of my character, my marriage, my very identity. She didn't just see me as a bank. She saw me as a fool, a sad, rich woman her father had married for convenience and whose money was therefore hers by right. The carefully constructed dam of denial I had built inside myself shattered. Every little whisper, every backhanded comment, every dismissive gesture crashed down on me at once. The maid of honor's snide remark in the bridal shop. Brooke's impatient voice on the phone. The crocodile tears over the guest list. It was all part of the same ugly truth. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a long con, and I was the mark. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my phone. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by an icy, clarifying rage. The pain was immense, a deep, shearing wound to the soul. But beneath the pain, something else was stirring: resolve. The financial analyst in me, the part that deals in cold, hard facts and assesses value, was taking over. I had made a bad investment, a catastrophic one, and now it was time to cut my losses. But my thoughts immediately went to David. My kind, loving, willfully blind David. He had to be a victim in this too. He wouldn't stand for this. He couldn't possibly know that this is how his daughter truly saw me, how she spoke about me. He would be just as horrified as I was. I needed to show him. I needed his support. I packed my briefcase, my movements stiff and robotic. I drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring through a film of unshed tears. When I walked through the door, David was in the living room, reading a book, the picture of domestic tranquility. "Hey, you're home late," he said, smiling at me over his glasses. I couldn't speak. I simply walked over and handed him my phone, the email chain glowing on the screen. "You need to read this," I said, my voice flat and empty. He took the phone, a frown of confusion on his face. I watched him as he read. I saw his expression shift from confusion to disbelief, then to a deep, troubled frown. He read it twice, his lips moving silently. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I waited for the explosion, for the outrage, for him to wrap his arms around me and tell me how monstrous this was, how he was going to call Brooke immediately and demand an explanation, an apology. Instead, he slowly set the phone down on the coffee table and scrubbed a hand over his face. He looked not at me, but at the floor. "She's under pressure, Savannah," he began, his voice low and strained. "She says things she doesn't mean. It's locker room talk, wedding edition. She's just trying to sound tough and important in front of the vendors." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. Was he hearing himself? "Locker room talk," I repeated, my voice rising with incredulity. "David, she called me a gold digger in reverse. She said you married me for my money. She is actively trying to defraud me by lying to vendors. How can you defend that?" "I'm not defending it," he said, finally looking at me, his eyes pleading. "It's wrong. It's a horrible thing to say, but she's my daughter. She's emotional and impulsive. If we confront her now, it will destroy her. It will ruin the wedding. Can't we just deal with this after, for the sake of peace?" And that was it. That was the moment the mask slipped, not just on Brooke, but on my entire marriage. In the face of undeniable, calculated cruelty from his daughter, David's first instinct was not to defend his wife, but to protect the perpetrator. He wanted me to absorb the poison, to swallow the insult, to continue writing checks, all for the sake of a peaceful facade. He was asking me to finance my own humiliation. I felt a profound and terrifying clarity. I was utterly and completely alone in this. My partner, the man I loved and trusted, was not my ally. He was, at best, a neutral party and at worst, a willing accomplice in his daughter's deception. The problem wasn't just Brooke's greed, it was David's weakness. "No," I said, the word coming out as a shard of ice. "No, we can't." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him sitting there with the evidence of his daughter's betrayal and his own lying on the table between us. I went upstairs, not to our bedroom, but to the guest room. I closed the door, and for the furs. Tea time, I locked it. The charade was over. The perfect day was a lie, and the promise had been broken beyond repair. The guest room became my sanctuary, my war room. For 2 days, I barely left it. I told David I needed space to think, a request he granted with a look of wounded confusion, as if I were the one being unreasonable. He would occasionally knock on the door, offering food or a stilted apology for Brooke's poor choice of words, but I refused to engage. His apologies were for the words, not the sentiment behind them, and that was a distinction that made all the difference. My first call was to Maria. My friend, my rock, the therapist who had guided me through professional and personal crises for over a decade. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, phone pressed to my ear, and read her Brooke's email, my voice cracking with a pain I could no longer suppress. Maria listened without interruption, a skill that made her an exceptional therapist and an even better friend. When I finished, the silence on her end was not judgmental, but absorbent. "Okay," she said finally, her voice calm and steadying. "First, breathe, Savannah, just breathe. What you are feeling right now, the anger, the betrayal, the heartbreak, is completely and totally valid. Do not let anyone, especially David, minimize that." "He called it locker room talk, Maria," I whispered, the absurdity of it still stinging. "He called it what he needed to call it to avoid confronting the truth," she corrected gently. "The truth that his daughter is manipulative and that he has enabled it. This isn't about you, not really. You've just disrupted a very old, very dysfunctional family system. You are the external element that has forced the sickness into the light." Her words were like a balm. She was giving me a framework, a way to understand the emotional chaos. This wasn't my fault. I hadn't been a fool, I had been lied to. "So what do I do?" I asked, my voice small. "Do I cancel everything? Do I leave him?" "Slow down," Maria cautioned. "Reactions born from pure emotion are often messy. You are a financial analyst. You are strategic. You are logical. Let's approach this like one of your portfolios. The asset, this image of a happy family, has been revealed as toxic. You don't just dump a toxic asset without a plan. You strategize an exit that minimizes damage to you and maximizes your return. In this case, your return is your self-respect and your peace." Over the next 48 hours, with Maria as my sounding board, I began my quiet reckoning. I didn't cry anymore. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was now overlaid with a cold, hard clarity. This was a business transaction gone wrong, and I would handle it as such. I pulled out my laptop and created a new spreadsheet, a document that would become my declaration of independence. I titled it simply, "The Price of a Wedding." Methodically, I went through every single receipt, every invoice, every bank transfer related to the wedding. I started with the initial lump sum I'd moved into the joint account. I tracked the deposit for the venue, a staggering $50,000. I entered the payment for the couture gown, the one Brooke had looked so angelic in while her friend mocked my contribution. I logged the non-refundable deposit for the celebrity photographer she'd insisted on, the fee for the 10-piece band, the extravagant cake tasting, the calligrapher for the invitations, the ever-expanding catering bill. I included the upgrades she'd made without my consent, the imported orchids, the extra 100 guests. I even found the invoice for the absurd ice luge she had tried to sneak past me. Patricia had thankfully held firm and not processed it, but I added the quote to the spreadsheet as a testament to the intent. With each line item I added, my resolve hardened. The numbers weren't just numbers, they were a quantifiable measure of the deceit. Each dollar sign was a symbol of my goodwill being exploited. I had offered a gift of love and family, and they had treated it like a corporate expense account. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were analyzing a client's disastrous financial situation. This emotional distance was a shield. It allowed me to see the facts without being drowned by the pain. The fact was, I had willingly entered into this arrangement. The fact was, I had been betrayed. The fact was, I held all the contractual power. My name, and mine alone, was on every significant agreement. I had insisted on it at the beginning, a professional habit to maintain control over my own finances. I had thought of it as a way to make things easier for David and Brooke. Now, I saw it for what it was, my salvation. During those 2 days, I also investigated. I looked at Brooke's social media with new eyes. Her public profile was a curated stream of bridal bliss. Photos of her and Leo gushing captions about their love story, and tag. D posts thanking the high-end vendors, but I had a suspicion. On a hunch, I looked up her maid of honor, Chloe. Her profile was private, but we had one mutual acquaintance, a distant cousin of David S. I sent a polite, brief message and was granted access. It was a cesspool of my stepdaughter's duplicity. There, in the comments of a photo from Brooke's bachelorette party, was a conversation that confirmed everything. Chloe had posted, living it up on the Stepmommy Express, locomotive money. Another friend commented with laughing emojis. Brooke herself had replied, SHHH, the ATM might hear you, winking face, just enjoying the perks of my dad's smart investment. Brooke is getting married, gold digger. The hashtag was the final nail in the coffin. It wasn't a slip of the tongue in a private email. It was a running joke, a nickname. They had a nickname for me, the ATM. I took a screenshot, then another. I documented everything, adding the images to a folder on my desktop labeled evidence. By the end of the second day, my spreadsheet was complete. The grand total at the bottom was breathtaking, a number that would have been a comfortable down payment on a beautiful home. My quiet reckoning was over. I was no longer a victim drowning in hurt. I was an analyst with a perfectly balanced sheet, a complete file of evidence, and a crystal-clear understanding of the situation. Mario was right. This was a toxic asset, and I was about to liquidate it. On the third morning, I emerged from the guest room. I was calm, composed, and dressed in a sharp business suit, as if heading to a high-stakes negotiation. Which, in a way, I was. David was in the kitchen, looking haggard. He had slept on the sofa. He stood up when he saw me, his face a mixture of hope and fear. Savannah, he started, can we please talk about this? We will, I said, my voice even and cool. But first, I have some work to do. I didn't wait for his response. I went to my home office, closed the door, and began making calls. My spreadsheet was open on one monitor, a list of vendor contacts on the other. This was my element. I was no longer a spurned wife or a wounded stepmother. I was Savannah, the financial analyst, executing a strategy. My first call was to Patricia, the venue coordinator. Patricia, this is Savannah, I began. I'm calling about the wedding of Brooke and Leo. I need to invoke the cancellation clause in our contract. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Ms. Savannah, are you sure? The wedding is in 2 weeks. The cancellation fee will be 100% of the total contract. You'll forfeit the entire amount. I am aware of the terms, Patricia, I replied calmly. I have them right here. The contract stipulates a full forfeiture of the fee, but it also releases you from any obligation to provide services. I am confirming that is correct. Well, yes, she stammered. That's what it means. We would keep the money, but the venue would not be available on that day. Excellent, I said. Please consider this my official notice. I will email you a written confirmation momentarily. I am forfeiting the full amount paid. You are under no obligation to host the wedding. In fact, I am formally instructing you not to allow the wedding party on the premises on that date. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am, she said, her voice filled with professional shock. Thank you for your discretion, Patricia, and thank you for your honesty in your previous email correspondence. It was very illuminating. I hung up before she could reply. One by one, I went down the list. The caterer, the florist, the photographer, the band, the couture bridal shop where the final dress alterations were being done. The conversations were all remarkably similar. You're canceling, but you'll lose the entire $80,000 deposit, the caterer exclaimed. I'm aware. Please confirm that no food or staff will be provided, I'd reply. The dress is ready for final pickup. It's non-refundable, the boutique owner told me, her voice laced with confusion. I understand, I'd say. I will not be picking it up. Please do with it as you wish. You are free to sell it to another client if you can. Consider it a gift. With every call, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. I was not destroying anything. The vendors were all being paid, often in full. They were losing a day of work, but they were keeping the money, as per the contracts I had so carefully signed. I was not costing anyone their livelihood. The only people who would be left with nothing were the ones who deserved it. The plan was simple and, in my opinion, elegantly just. I wasn't just pulling the plug. I was creating a vacuum. The entire infrastructure of the wedding, every single element that Brooke had bragged about and taken for granted, would simply vanish into thin air. The venue would be empty. The caterers would not arrive. The flowers would not be delivered. The music would not play. Why? My final act of preparation was for David. I knew that when the dust settled, he would try to paint me as vindictive and cruel. He would use my wealth against me, framing this as a rich woman's tantrum. I needed to neutralize that narrative before it could even begin. I delved into our shared finances. As a couple, we had a joint checking account for household bills, but our primary assets were kept separate, another professional habit of mine that was now proving invaluable. I pulled up David's financial statements. He had given me access years ago, asking for help in organizing his retirement planning. He was, as I already knew, functionally broke. His professor's salary covered his personal expenses and his half of the mortgage, but he had no significant savings, no investments to speak of, and a modest pension that was still years from being accessible. I created a second tab on my spreadsheet. This one I titled Shared Reality. I detailed David's financial situation in stark, undeniable terms. I showed his income, his assets, and his debts. Then, next to it, I put the total cost of the wedding. The number I had paid was more than double his entire net worth. The picture it painted was brutal but true. He, and by extension his daughter, had been living in a fantasy funded entirely by me. The gold digger accusation was not just insulting, it was mathematically absurd. I printed both spreadsheets, the price of a wedding and shared reality. I printed the screenshots of Brooke's social media posts. I placed everything into a sleek, professional-looking presentation folder. My plan was complete. I had assessed the damage, mitigated my losses in the only way that mattered by reclaiming my dignity, and prepared my evidence. The stage was set. All that was left was the final performance. I walked out of the office and found David pacing in the hallway. "We need to talk," he said, his voice strained. "I agree," I replied, my voice betraying no emotion. But not now. We'll talk at the rehearsal dinner, all of us, as a family. He looked confused, but a flicker of hope returned to his eyes. He thought my willingness to wait meant I was softening, that I was coming around to his keep the peace strategy. He thought we were going to have a calm, mature discussion where I would gracefully accept an insincere apology. He had no idea that I wasn't coming to the rehearsal dinner to make peace. I was coming to make a statement. The rehearsal dinner was held at a chic, expensive restaurant that Brooke had selected. It had a private room with a long, mahogany table, soft lighting, and an air of understated elegance. When I walked in with David, the room was already buzzing with conversation and laughter. Brooke and Leo were at the center of it all, glowing. Brooke, wearing a stylish white dress, rushed over to me. "Savannah, I'm so glad you're here," she gushed, giving me an airy kiss on the cheek. Her eyes were bright, but I saw a flicker of calculation in them. She thought the storm had passed, that her father had successfully smoothed things over. I was so worried. Dad said you were just feeling a bit overwhelmed by everything. "I'm fine, Brooke," I said, my voice neutral. I looked past her to David, who gave me a weak, grateful smile. He was a fool, they both were. I took my seat, the leather-bound presentation folder resting in my lap. I was polite, engaged in small talk, and even smiled when Leo's parents spoke lovingly about their son. I played the part of the supportive stepmother flawlessly. I watched Brooke hold court, laughing loudly, showing off her ring, talking about my wedding with a proprietary air that made my stomach turn. She was the star of a movie that she didn't realize had already been canceled. After the main course, the toasts began. Leo's father went first, followed by the maid of honor, Chloe, who gave a speech filled with saccharine compliments and inside jokes that made my skin crawl. Then, it was David's turn. He stood up, glass in hand, and looked first at Brooke, then at me. "I want to propose a toast," he began, his voice thick with genuine emotion. "To my daughter, Brooke, who has grown into a remarkable woman, and to my incredible wife, Savannah." He paused, looking directly at me. "Savannah, your generosity, your kindness, and your love have made all of this possible. You stepped in and made my little girl's dream a reality, and for that, I will be eternally grateful. You have shown us the true meaning of family." The room erupted in applause. People smiled at me, their eyes soft with admiration. Brooke beamed, raising her glass to me in a grand gesture of thanks. The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it. This was my cue. As David sat down, I remained standing. I picked up my folder from my lap and placed it on the table with a soft, definitive thud. A hush fell over the room as all eyes turned to me. "Thank you, David," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the room's excellent acoustics. That was a beautiful sentiment, and it brings me to a toast I'd like to make myself. I opened the folder. As some of you know, my background is in finance. I deal with numbers, with assets, with investments, and I believe in transparency. I believe in understanding the true value of things. David mentioned my generosity. I'd like to quantify that generosity for everyone so we can all appreciate it. I slid the first spreadsheet, the price of a wedding, out of the folder and held it up. This is a list of every single expense for this wedding: the historic manor, the couture gown, the celebrity photographer, the 10-piece band, the 300 guests, the imported orchids. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room, landing on Brooke, whose smile had begun to falter. The grand total for this perfect day is $376,000. A gift I was happy to give because, as David said, I wanted to show my commitment to this family. A wave of murmurs went through the room. The number hung in the air, obscene and shocking. "However," I continued, my voice hardening slightly, "an investment is only as good as the integrity of the people you're investing in, and I recently discovered that my investment was unsound." I pulled out the screenshots of the social media comments. I learned that I have a nickname. I'm the ATM. And that my stepdaughter, the bride-to-be, jokes with her friends about being a gold digger. and how her father married a lonely workaholic for her bank account. I dropped the screenshots on the table. Brooke's face had gone sheet white. Her eyes were wide with horror. Chloe, the maid of honor, looked like she was about to be physically ill. David stared at me, his mouth agape, a look of pure disbelief on his face as if he couldn't believe I was doing this. So I did what any prudent financial analyst would do, I said, my voice dropping to a cool, clinical tone. I cut my losses. As of yesterday afternoon, I have paid every single vendor their full cancellation fee. The contracts are settled. However, their services will not be rendered. There is no venue. There is no caterer. There is no photographer, no band, and no dress. The wedding that cost $376,000 is now worth exactly zero. A collective gasp went through the room. Brooke made a small, choking sound. This wedding, I announced, my voice ringing with finality, is cancelled. I turned my gaze to Brooke, whose face was now a mask of tear-streaked panic. Unless, of course, you'd like to pay for it yourself. The vendors are all available. They just need to be paid again. Then I turned to my husband. And David, just so we're all clear on the financial realities here, I slid the second spreadsheet, shared reality, across the table towards him. This is your net worth, and this is what I paid. The accusation that you married me for my money is, as you can see, not only offensive but also tragically accurate in its implication. You brought nothing to the table but a daughter who holds you, and me, in utter contempt. I looked around at the stunned, silent faces. My work was done. I had not screamed or cried. I had simply presented the facts. The truth was its own verdict. So I'd like to propose a toast, I said, raising my water glass. To the truth, it's not always pretty, but it is, unlike this wedding, priceless. I took a sip of water, placed the glass back on the table, picked up my purse, and turned to leave. As I walked towards the door, the silence was finally broken by a hysterical sob from Brooke. I didn't look back. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of their lies behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly, completely free. The drive home from the restaurant was surreal. I didn't go to the house I shared with David. I went straight to Maria S. When she opened the door, she didn't need to ask how it went. She just saw my face, calm, exhausted, and resolute, and pulled me into a hug. "You did it," she whispered. "I did it," I confirmed, and the finality of those words settled over me, not with sadness, but with a profound sense of peace. My phone started exploding almost immediately. A barrage of texts and missed calls from David, from Leo's parents, even from some of David's relatives who had been at the dinner. I switched it to silent and left it in my purse. I knew what the messages would say, a mixture of anger, pleading, and accusations of cruelty. They would try to reframe the narrative, to paint me as the villain who had humiliated a young bride out of spite. But I had spoken the truth in a room full of witnesses. The facts were immutable. The next day, David showed up at Maria's house. Maria, ever the protector, met him at the door. I could hear their muffled conversation from the living room. His voice was desperate, hers was firm and clinica. He wasn't allowed inside. He left after 10 minutes, defeated. Maria came back in and handed me a letter he'd brought. It was a rambling, 4-page mess of apologies, excuses, and accusations. He was sorry for what Brooke said, but he was devastated by how I'd handled it. He loved me, but he couldn't forgive the public humiliation of his daughter. He was caught in the middle. It was a monument to his own weakness, a written testament to his inability to choose his wife over the toxic dynamic he'd cultivated with his child. I read it once, then tore it into 4 neat pieces and dropped it in the recycling bin. The days that followed were about logistics, an area where I excelled. I hired a divorce lawyer, not Maria, but a cut-and-dry professional she recommended. The process was surprisingly clean. Our assets were mostly separate, and the house was the only major shared property. I offered to buy him out, a generous offer that would give him enough capital to start over somewhere else. He accepted through his lawyer, a sign that he had no fight left in him. We never spoke directly again. I learned through the grapevine what happened to Brooke. Her relationship with Leo crumbled under the weight of the scandal and the sudden, crushing reality of their finances. The public humiliation was one thing, but Leo, the kind-eyed teacher, finally saw the true nature of the woman he was about to marry. He saw the greed and the deception, and he couldn't unsee it. He called off the engagement a week after the disastrous rehearsal dinner. Brooke, stripped of her fairy tale wedding and her fiancé, was forced to confront reality. She and David tried to salvage some kind of smaller event, but they had no money and no social standing left among their circle. The story of the toast to the truth had spread like wildfire. Brooke was no longer seen as a blushing bride, but as a cautionary tale of greed and entitlement. A few months later, I was finalizing the sale of the house. I had decided to sell it and move into a chic apartment in the city, closer to my work and to a life that was solely my own. As I was sorting through the last of my things, I found a small, framed photo from my wedding day with David. We looked happy. We were, I think, in our own way. But our foundation was built on a lie we both chose to ignore. That I could buy my way into his family, and that he could offer me a place that wasn't truly his to give. I left the frame on the mantelpiece for the new owners. My past was a part of my story, but it no longer defined my present. My new life is quieter, but it is honest. My work continues to challenge and fulfill me. My friendship with Maria is a rock. I travel. I read. I've started mentoring young women in finance, teaching them not only how to build their wealth, but how to protect their worth. I don't hate David or Brooke. I view them now as I would a failed investment, with a sense of regret for the initial misjudgment, but with gratitude for the lessons learned. They taught me the true meaning of value. It isn't found in a stock portfolio, a house, or a lavish wedding. It's found in respect, in honesty, and in the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you are worthy of love that is freely given, not strategically acquired. I paid a high price for that lesson, $376,000 to be exact, but in exchange, I bought back my life. I bought back my self-respect. I bought a future I deserve, one where I am the sole proprietor, the only signatory, and the most valuable asset. And that is a return on investment that is, truly, priceless.